Delighted to formally welcome everyone to today's third webinar in our online conference, How to Turn Around a Poor Customer Experience. I'm Rachel and I'll be your webinar chairperson for today. Delighted to introduce, or I don't think I really have to introduce, but welcome to today's webinar, Martin Hill-Wilson from Brain Food Consulting.
Thank you very much.
And Martin, for those people who don't know who you are and what you do, could you share a bit about yourself?
I sit in boardrooms like this and talk. That's what I do. I do white papers, I do sharing, I do keynotes. When there's some really interesting stuff, I do consulting. So at the moment, I'm just getting together some stuff on AI and customer service, because that's a new kind of area. I do quite a lot of work at the moment on digital and omni-channel. And I also actually have gotten back into a project that I have which has been resting for a year, back into performance and quality, interestingly. And that, although it's not necessarily such a fashionable area, it's still really important to the majority of contact centers, because again, we haven't got the right culture, we haven't actually got the right foundation. And I must say, unless you get that bit right, all of this stuff that we do like to spend more time talking about, it's not going to happen unless you've got that foundation. So I've been involved in this for more decades than I'm prepared to confess in public. That's me.
And Chris Haggis, delighted to welcome you back to, I believe it's your second webinar with us.
Yep.
Welcome back. And for people who haven't heard about New Voice Media, what is it that you guys do?
Sure. As I mentioned, we're a cloud contact center, so we take the traditional channels such as IVR, ACD, call recording, reporting. We bring those into a cloud platform, pure cloud platform. We're a global provider. We've got our nodes in all the major regions, so we can provide that service in that manner.
Thank you very much. So we are taking a recording of today's webinar. It will be available later on this afternoon, and I think we're sending out an email to everyone for all the replays that have happened today. So if you wanted to log in to our chat room, it's on callcenterhelper.com/chat. And the added bonus is that you can download the slides today. There is a lot of information that Chris and Martin are going to be sharing, so you just download them from up here. The added advantage also is that we are running our bottle of champagne or box of chocolates for a best tip. You just write #question for a question and #tip for a tip. We have been asking in 1 or 2 words, how would you describe your current customer experience? We've had a few replies. We recognize it now, but we could do it better, is what Jackie's saying. Andrea's saying, I think it's good, but we're always trying to do better. And Charlie said, a lot of work is going into mapping out of the customer journey, so hopefully that will lead to a better experience. So I just want to share our first poll and launch that with you. Let's do that now. And it is, what attributes make for a good customer experience? Is it low customer effort, consistent across all channels, able to resolve the problem, polite, well-informed staff, or answer calls quickly? It is a multiple choice question. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Martin, if you were a betting person, as I'm in Cheltenham today, what would you suggest on that one?
Well, I think they're all important. If you have to actually say, what do you think we need to do to give a good customer experience, I'd have to tick all those boxes. But if you're asking which one is going to come out on top,
yes.
I mean, really, the foundation one is getting the problem solved, to be honest with you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Everything else is important in terms of how it feels and the ways in which it takes place. But if you can't actually resolve the problem, you haven't turned up for lunch.
Should we go for a second as well?
For a second one.
So I agree with Martin on the able to solve the problem, and I'll go low customer effort.
Yeah, I'm curious. There you go, you see.
Fab. So I will share the results.
No.
Actually, 76 able to solve the problem and polite, well-informed staff. Coming out third, consistent across all channels. Low customer effort is 56%, and 44% answered calls quickly. So I'm guessing, Chris, it's a bit of a shock for you then.
It was actually, yeah, that one. Yeah, it was good. No, it makes sense.
Okay, we were informed by the public here. Yeah, very good. Excellent. Okay.
So before we get into Martin's presentation, I just wanted to share with you, you know, it is the Daily Mail. I do apologise, but it was kind of something that I saw very in the news, and as the topic is about customer experience and being able to switch suppliers and things, this was something that I saw about. New record as 660,000 people switch energy suppliers. So February saw 24,000 customers a day swapping their energy suppliers. So Martin, I don't know what your thoughts are on this one. Obviously very timely.
Well, I mean, if I was a brand and I actually had 24,000 people leave me on a day, I would be desperately upset, I must say. It's interesting in markets where the regulator has removed the effort, you know, to do that. And it's not yet true in all marketplaces. It's interesting to see how much people are prepared to vote with their feet and kind of move on. And it does really pick up a theme that we're going to talk about a lot today, which is the consequences of getting it right and the consequences of getting it wrong. But certainly as marketplaces are engineered, so there's less friction around of that, and if it doesn't work, you can move on. There you go. That's the consequences of that. And there are definite winners and losers. Now, the interesting thing is the degree to which things like product and price still cause people to move. You can't forget that. And indeed, you know, we haven't got time for it today, but quite a few people in the CX community would argue that you've got to include those components. Otherwise, you know, you're just ignoring the fundamentals. But with that will also go the fact that they haven't had positive customer experience. And therefore they're going to move as a result of that. So it's not of any great surprise to me, but it's interesting when you see the numbers at scale, it does look frightening.
Brilliant. So I think it's now an excellent time to hand over the presenting baton to you, Martin, and I will hand it over to you both.
Excellent. Great. So let me just get to the top of my presentation. I'm assuming, is that nice and clear then? Can everyone see that?
I can, yes.
Good, excellent. All right. So, title of this presentation: How to Turn Around a Poor Customer Experience. I'm going to begin by deftly pivoting, and what I want to do is to talk about this, but I want to put a slightly broader context around it, and really talk about the state of customer experience, and to suggest that in the hierarchy of needs, one of the things that is really, really important for brands and their customers to understand is the fact that relationships pivot around of emotion or an emotive state. And I want to explore that a little bit in today's presentation, because understanding that and the dynamics also helps us to understand how do you transform a poor customer experience. Some of you may have seen this material before, but I think it's still invaluable, because customer experience is one of those words that we all sort of know what we mean, but on the other hand, if you're then pushed to give a definition, it can be difficult. And I have got two definitions here from different organizations. One is from the research business Forrester, and the other is from a well-known CX business called Bruce Temkin and the Customer Experience Matters community. And both of them say pretty much the same thing, which is that if you're going to analyze what a customer experience is about, it's about three things. It's about effectiveness or success, depending which model you're looking at, and that's really the outcome. And in fact, we looked at that in our poll, didn't we? We all said just now that getting the result is the single most important thing from the customer's perspective. You know, that's what we're in business for. The next thing, which is, I think, again, somebody mentioned that they were working hard, it was Charlie, I think, working hard on customer journeys. And I think I know a lot of people are doing that right now. One of the key drivers for doing that is because we recognize it is difficult for us to engage with an organization. We still put too many blocks in place, not intentionally, but because many of those processes have been engineered from an internal perspective for the benefit of the brand, not necessarily for the benefit of the customer. And so one of the metrics that allows us to see where we are in that journey is effort. And again, I know a lot of people have started to add customer effort into their key set of metrics. So that matters. And then the other thing that matters is the emotion, how we feel about that. There are some, core hygiene experiences, and it was interesting that, people stated politeness, and well-informed as really a table stakes, I suppose. It applies to all forms of journey. But I would also suggest that there's an emotional signature that fits against different journeys. So, for example, if all things go well, onboarding a customer, or me as a customer joining a brand, if you think about a single experience there, it ought to be that it's a happy event. If you've got a claim or a complaint, generally speaking, that is not a happy event, at least initially. And so there are certain emotional signatures that fit with particular journeys. But the benefit of what we can see on the right-hand side of this slide from the Temkin research is that he has matched up those particular things against the propensity of customers to buy more and give a decent score in terms of NPS. And it's interesting to notice that at least in terms of this piece of work, emotion is considered to be the most significant of the three. Forrester, it's not represented on this slide, also think that it can be up to 50% of the whole puzzle in terms of what drives the customer to feel good or bad about a particular brand. So those are three dimensions. We're going to come back to that, and by the way, if you've never seen this before, I actually think it's a really good way of analyzing what your customer experience is. It's a good thing that you should have metrics against each of them, and it makes a lot of sense to people in terms of breaking it down. Just to reiterate the point, though, that we're focusing upon, the single most important thing that companies are already well along their transformations can do is to understand and embrace the importance of emotion. And it's an important point, this, that he goes on to make. You can create the easiest, most effective experience in the world, but unless it has the right emotional quotient, unless it leaves the customer feeling the way they need to feel, customers won't walk away saying the experience was great. And I think we as customers would absolutely, acknowledge that. And again, in probably the last 12, 18 months of me doing these webinars, I must say that I've talked more about emotion in the context of customer service and in particular contact centers than I think we ever have done in our history. So it's on our agenda, we get that point. We recognize intuitively how important it is. Now, intuitive is one level, it's good to also have a little bit of science here. And there's a good piece of research which, if you haven't seen, I'm going to show you the source of it on the next slide. But it basically suggests that there is a journey that as customers we sometimes go on in relationship to organizations. The first one that starts is right at the beginning of a journey, can actually remain throughout the whole of our relationship with the brand, but we're just not emotionally connected. It's utilitarian, it's functional, it does what it does, but there's nothing else. And then we get to a point where we can be satisfied. We can even see the brand as being different and therefore more distinctive in our eyes. But when we reach a point where we feel completely connected with that brand, the brand matters, the brand delivers important experiences to us that track back to our sense of identity, the things that are driving us in life. If you know your Maslow's hierarchy, think in those kinds of terms, then that's the point where the relationship is really deep and it has got duration to it. And the important thing that we know in today's world is that you can be satisfied and, functionally you've done all the stuff, but you're not necessarily at the place where you're going to be completely loyal, stick around with the brand. I mean, some people would say loyalty is dead, but if you are still going to compete in today's world and keep the attention and interest of customers, then really being fully connected is the place that you should be orientating your effort towards. And just in terms of the commercials, the difference between a fully connected customer and one that's not yet emotionally connected is, as they say in the headlines here, it's worth twice the amount in terms of value at the end of the day. If you want to know where that piece of work comes from, you can find that over at Harvard Business Review. The title of the article is called The New Science of Customer Emotions. I had a good look at it, and it's really quite interesting the way that they lay it out. There's probably a bit more for us to in there than we have time today to talk about, but I just thought I would also include some other areas where they have done this work, because they're a group of consultants, Scott, Alan and Daniel, and they did it in different marketplaces and found that the impact was different according to the particular kind of solution or purchase that the customer was making. But the headline that they came up with is that it is actually worth twice the amount. Going back to Forrester, just to look for some other evidence that sort of builds this story, again, it's interesting to see the gap between the people who are doing this really well and the people that are behind the curve. And people that really understand the importance of designing, executing and delivering the right experience at the right point are getting that right on a ratio of 28 times to 1 in terms of a negative. People who are not very good at that, you know, it's a bit more of a lottery, and 2 times it can be good, but the third one, it's not going to be so good. And this is a piece of work that I saw presented, in fact, I think of 1.5 years ago, by the lady in question you just see at the top there, Joanna. And again, you know, the market will have probably moved on, and that ratio of leader to laggard will even be more extreme today than it is now. But that's what good looks like in today's world at this particular point in time. Interestingly, one of the reasons that we did want to talk about this today is that New Voice Media runs a piece of research, which is a really interesting piece, every couple of years. The last time it happened was around 2015. And in fact, I think I was presenting on that one at that particular point in time. And it's couched in terms of the headline, which is, you know, how bad does it have to get before I switch, and how many of us are switching, and why is that taking place? They've just done that piece of work again, and I think it's due to be released in the next month or so. So please book a copy and ask for that, because it's a good piece of work. But the headline there, just as a sneak preview, is again corroborative of what we've just been talking about, which is that 60% of people say, you know, it's much more likely, I'm much more likely to buy from a brand or from an agent if I had a positive emotional connection with them. Now, that kind of makes sense, but it is good to understand how important that is to customers, and it's important for us to be able to concentrate on that in terms of our training and our whole focus. And this is why I've rebadged this particular discussion around its emotive customer experience, because that's the essence of what we're trying to get good at. What does bad look like? Well, in terms of that, it's interesting that between the 2 data points of 2015 and 2018, actually not a lot has changed. Roughly speaking, we're losing 42% of people, not a great deal of difference between the genders, people who are likely to switch as a result of poor service. Now, again, Rachel showed a slightly higher figure, I think, wasn't it, on the energy switching? But
that's right. Yeah, I think the 3. I was reading something the other day. I think the 3 biggest reasons for the bad look like really kind of like problem not solved, getting the wrong answer, and long delays. And so still long delays is a significant thing to
still a driver. At the end of the day. So we are losing that now. That's one dimension to it. You know, what's the consequence in money terms? Again, there's a lot of data out there. You might have done, and by the way, everybody ought to do this work for themselves. You know, it's one thing to see market stats. You need to bring this back in-house and say, how much are we losing and what's the financial consequence? But it was interesting that last year the Ombudsman added up the numbers and reckons that as far as the UK is concerned, 37 billion is the number in question. I'm sure that would do handsomely in the Brexit negotiations right now, wouldn't it? If we didn't waste money in that particular respect. So bad looks bad, you know, as far as this is concerned. It is for real. Sometimes we can ignore it because we just get busy and we win more customers, we lose customers, we don't really think about it. But if you take a snapshot of that audit, that balance, if you want, are we winning, are we losing? It's important to take stock and to understand the reasons and the motivations for that. So we were talking earlier on about customer journeys. This is a very simple way to talk about the life cycle. And it's actually, I like this one because it suggests that in fact the whole business of buying and acquiring customers, the sales and the marketing, and then the customer owning the product and service and then being looked after is a seamless thing. And it's extremely important for organizations to try to plan themselves according to that idea. But in terms of those different teams, what matters? And I think in today's world, that sales teams particularly have to make sure that they get on the same wavelength as customers. And in particular, they have to make a difference because we are competing for limited attention. I don't know where I heard this recently, but we are now officially, apparently, Chris, at the point where goldfish have longer attention spans.
Really?
Yeah, really. I don't know how they measure that, by the way, which is an interesting point. But we have now officially, it's about 3 seconds. In fact, on that basis, everyone's dipped out of the seminar already, according to that definition. But, if we're going to get back into contact with people, you've got to connect with them at a deeper level than the information. There's so much stuff out there. And actually, it's a very important point. If you're still going to use live assistance, even if it's embedded in-house as an inside sales team, fact of the matter is, as a customer, I can find most of that information on the web, right? So why would I want to speak to you? Why would I want to listen to you? It's not probably for the information side. Or if it is about information, it's because I need to trust it. Yes, I need to actually explore it in a way that I feel confident about what I've read about. In which case, it's a matter of connecting to people, it's the trust element, and how do I make that happen? So I think increasingly the science of motive CX for sales teams is to understand the emotional triggers and to make sure that we're training on people, for example, and understanding how that might be mapped against different personas.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the trust element because that's coming up in some of the comments on the chat room there.
Is it?
Just that thing about, read it on the website, do I really trust it? I'm going to actually phone up to make sure that's right.
Yeah. I mean, we live in a world of fake news.
Yeah.
And that's a fact of life that we are finding very difficult to cure. So curiously, the role of live will be to validate, the physical world of us versus the digital world of, online. Again, there's an important thing. So emotional connections is important there. And again, just looking at the service community, we definitely have to keep working at those journeys. We definitely have to keep talking to the rest of the business about their contribution or the way they can get in the way of a seamless experience. And we have to think about what the customer experiences as a positive outcome and the way that they have to get to that outcome. And so again, optimizing things towards that particular end.
Just one comment. I think it'd be really interesting. So I'm sure some of the people in the chat rooms, some of the attendees that have tried this, but getting inside sales reps to talk to service reps about their emotional experiences and the crossover must be will be quite fascinating to be a fly on the wall there because there are so many things that I'm sure a salesperson could help a service agent on that.
Well, I'm a big fan of that. Yeah. I mean, I actually last week at a conference, really interesting guy coming from a marketing space, talking about the connections between marketing and service, much deeper than service is the new marketing. You really map the things out. And I think actually what you've just said is another little thing that you can put in that things to learn from each other. Yeah, dead interesting. So question for you, I think we've listened enough. Let's get everybody actively involved. Within the context of, the life cycle, how good are you in terms of the sales process? How good are you in terms of the service process of understanding the emotional drivers and capturing it, in a way? So here's the particular question I want to ask you, which again, we're going to flip into a poll in a second. These are some of the competencies in emotive customer experience management. Number one, we've got relevant objectives. Now that could be at corporate level. It could be within the sales team, could be within the service teams. It could be down at team level, or it could even be for you individually. You've been tasked with that in some way. Second part of that is that, you can't really have an objective without the ability to measure it. So have you got relevant metrics? Now, we've got tons of quantitative metrics all over the place. I know sentiment is beginning to become more and more important. But again, thinking about the metrics that you live and die by, you spend all your day talking about in team meetings and all that stuff, which, if any of those, reflect the emotive component of your engagement with customers? That's that one. And then the final thing is, are we trying to get better at it? You know, have you got things that you're doing right now, Q1 of this year, or due to be happening during the course of the year, where you're trying to make sure that we're improving as far as that's concerned? So there you go. That's my description. Let us know if you feel that you're involved in any or all of those. And again, let's have our little crystal ball. We got 1 out of 2 right last time. True. What do you reckon?
Yeah, so we've launched the poll. What are you both betting on then?
I'm going to bet that probably 3 is more popular than the first 2. I think people are generally getting involved in bits of it. I mean, they might have a bit of training, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. No,
I'd be very surprised if people at individual level have got, you know, objectives specifically around this.
I would have thought that one would be the one to give, to be more
popular.
More popular, okay. Yeah.
Actually, we don't know. No clue at all. We're clueless today. We are clueless.
So last few people are voted, and I'll share the results. So 56% are actively working on this aspect. 47% have relevant objectives, and 41% have relevant metrics. Was that what you were expecting? Oh, okay. So pleased with that one.
No. Well, I think pleasantly surprised.
Did pick number 3. So
I did.
Yeah.
I've redeemed myself somewhat. Yeah. But no, that's great news. That is great news. Now, by the way, I tell you what would be terrific, just before we lose the slide there. If anybody has got the time and they're in the poll, if you could unpack that a bit for us in terms of examples of the metrics, what you call them. If you could give examples of the projects that you're involved in. It might not be projects, it just might be encoded into induction or training. I don't know whatever it is that you meant by that. Let us know a little bit more detail, because right at the end of this session, we want to come back to this and pick up some of those things. So that would be really handy. Actually, I'll tell you what, are we going to do a little bit of that right now, Rachel?
We can go over to the chat room. Yes.
Is it relevant, or should we wait for a wee while?
I think we wait for a wee while. I think I'll hand back the baton back to you.
All right. Now that's okay. Right. So let's just continue for a wee while.
Fab.
So that being said, hopefully I've done some scene setting on it. Obviously it makes sense because people have responded in that way. I just want to cover off some tips really for getting started and really moving on. Now again, apologies if you know this one, but it is always worth repeating and saying that in the world of emotion, as opposed to the world of decisions and ration and reason and mind, how do we remember an experience? That's an incredibly important question, because obviously the way we remember it conditions our view of how well that organization did. And it's interesting to note, in a more general sense, that we do not record everything. It would be too exhausting to do that. We don't have enough brain power. So what happens is the brain, and the memory in particular, picks out exceptions, which is why, curiously, we as soon as you buy a yellow car, guess what you notice on the street? Yellow cars. When good forms of quality management are always about looking at the outliers, for example, as opposed to the averages, etc., etc. So when you look at an experience, what tends to get remembered is certainly the peaks of greatness and not goodness. In other words, the rubbishy bits. We remember that in terms of looking back. And the other thing that we remember very strongly is both the beginning and the end. I don't think either are more important. The start, given what I've just been talking about, is incredibly important to get on the same wavelength, to make an emotional connection. I mean, personally, just to give an example here, if I am doing a keynote, the first 2-3 minutes standing on stage has nothing to do at all with what I intend to discuss. It's all to do with me making a connection with the audience. And in fact, personally, as a presenter, it's me connecting to the audience rather than the other way around, because otherwise the information just flies over people's heads. And you have to get in your boots as far as that's concerned. And what is interesting with a live engagement, whether it's chat, whether it's text or voice or video, is getting to the point of engaging. Now, some people like to spend a little time on that, and it's an important aspect. Some people are much more functional and just want to get on with it, but even so, they want to feel that you're on the same wavelength. So it's a real skill to do that. How many times do people do this a day in a contact centre? What's the numbers?
Oh, well, average calls, about 50 to 100.
50 to 100.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're going to get that right, nailed every single time, 50 times at least, 100 times every day, multiplied by 5 in a week. You know, it's a big ask to get that stuff right. And then the way you end a call, again, frames my experience of that. So that's a real skill. And again, open question to people. If you know that model, if you haven't heard it, by the way, you know, take it on board. I don't know what it's called.
Pink End Rule.
Thank you.
By Daniel.
Is it Pink? Is it Daniel Pink?
No, I can't remember.
Somebody else.
We'll find out.
Well, look it up. Anyway, go Google that. And if it's not yet institutionalized in your training, in your coaching regimes, please include it. It's a really sort of foundational skill. If those of you who are doing it, let us know how successful that is and whether or not that is yielding benefit. So that's first thing, getting started, understand the ebb and the flow of how the experience goes. Next one I want to talk about is probably very topical in this year. So, for example, from my perspective of what I get involved in, probably the most popular things are things like digital customer service, AI, chatbots, all that good stuff. And it's true that we are now beginning to see a rebalancing between the use of live assistance versus self-service. And many people who have digital in terms of their objectives are in all but name attempting to automate everything in sight. Now, I do not think that's a bad thing. If you talk to most people in contact centers and talk about their motivation, it's true that we really have misused people to do the most trivial, mundane things, and that's no longer a successful thing to do from the cost of that, or indeed from the customer expectation that it happens now, and there's no effort to me getting my outcome. It's also true that the world is not going to pivot and revolve around an entirely automated universe. You know, it might surprise people to know that Amazon, which is the master practitioner of this, has at least 900 people in EMEA who provide live customer service. You can't find that, by the way, by going Google that on their website, but trust me, that exists. So even the best in the market in terms of automation understand the importance to escalate into human. And the trick going forward is to find the balance that works for you. The balance that you have in 3 years' time between automation and live, between digital and human, will be different from what you've got today for all sorts of reasons. But if you want a rule of thumb, it's pretty simple. When things are emotional, when things are complex, when things matter to the relationship, that is always the domain of human beings. The remainder, though, increasingly is up for grabs in terms of our expectation to get it done whenever. There's a stat I'm telling at the moment, which again, if you've heard me say it before, I apologize, but roughly this time last year in May, it was a bank holiday, and I read an article about a week after that talking about the peaks and troughs of the e-commerce activity on, I think, the Saturday it was, of the bank holiday. And interestingly, it wasn't when most people think it was, i.e. 8 o'clock, maybe 9 o'clock, maybe even 11 o'clock at night. It was actually 3 a.m. in the morning. And it does make you wonder what's happened. I think what's happened is that I've gone out, had a good time, and I'm dangerous in front of the keyboard at that point in the day. And if you think about that, and you think about that's when most sales took place, that's when you also need to have service. Now, who's going to resource another shift at 3 a.m. in the morning? Ain't going to happen. Ain't going to happen. So self-service is absolutely vital, but we've got to understand the balance between those two worlds. And organizations that sail too close to the wind and forget the emotive CX component here will get a short-term benefit in reduced cost of service, but they're also going to find that there's no reason for customers to stick around. So it's incredibly important to get that balance. So hence the point that I want to make here, and that is, if you want to really think about omnichannel and some of the key driving principles in doing it well, it's all about a synergy. It's not replacing one with t'other. It's about how those two worlds synergize together. And in fact, one of the important things you were mentioning earlier on, Chris, about new channels, I think we mentioned messaging.
Yes.
is with all your live channels and with all your self-service channels, getting between those two worlds has to be seamless.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the escalation between the two is absolutely vital.
Yeah. Well, so omnichannel is something we've invested heavily in over the last couple of years, simply for that reason. In that you don't want them seen as separate. You want to know, you want to be able to service customers in the same way on each channel. And also the desktop comes into it. That unified desktop strategy is still very, very important to allow customers, to allow agents to have a single place to receive all those interactions and not to go to split screens and different screens and all the rest of it. It's still really, really important.
Well, that's their version of complexity and emotional, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely, at the end of the day. So that really is what's driving the best-in-class stuff around of omnichannel, understanding how those two worlds work at the end of the day. So that's another component of managing to introduce and recognize the emotive component of CX and balance that out against the utilitarian aspect of it. I just want it fast, I want it easy, I want it quick.
Martin, just to let you know, we've had Caroline say that the book that you were talking about is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and there's a good TED Talk available on it too.
Oh, thank you.
Caroline.
If you can find the TED Talk URL, get you to do a bit more work for us, that would be very much appreciated. If you could URL that for everybody else's benefit. Thank you very much for that.
There we go.
So, by the way, just before I leave this point, I'm going to soapbox for another 15 seconds. For those of you that have digital as your context, I would like to suggest to you that maybe you should say digital is a form of engagement. Important, a lot of people want to do it, but it's a form of engagement. The thing that you should have as your overall context is omnichannel, within which digital fits. Okay, that's that. The other thing that is incredibly important, obviously, is to figure out what matters to customers. This is the whole business of outside-in view. And, one of the things that is interesting about a customer service environment is the sheer volume of data that is generated every single day. A massive amount. You know that. Anybody that has to pivot on Excel spreadsheets, you don't need to be told that point. And as you wade through all the data, it's a heck of a challenge. And I'd suggest that even that experience probably only taps into rules. I don't know, a very small proportion of that data.
I think with one of our customers, we ran some stats the other day on how often they listen to call recorders, and it was like 0.1% of the total call recording, something like that. Yeah. So, our ability to do this is negligible. And actually, that's one of the reasons why machine learning and stuff is so interesting in terms of being able to capture that. But right now, how much more can we actually tap into? And this is again back onto a very dear topic from my point of view, which is that we've got to understand these journeys. Whilst it's important to map them out, it's really important to base that mapping out on voice of the customer. Sometimes you can do post-call surveys and all the rest of it, but it's equally useful, in fact, maybe more useful, to listen to the actual engagement, and to understand what customers have been talking about, to understand their intent, what the context of the discussion is, how they feel about that, and what matters to them. And so understanding journeys is critically important. And I would argue that unless you have got some form of speech analytics or actually text analytics as well, you have severely disadvantaged yourself in terms of being able to get those journeys working better. Now, linking those 2 points together, there's a really interesting piece of research that, again, Bruce Temkin's group did last year. Now, this is US data, so I'm not pretending that this maps directly onto UK customers. I don't know. However, what is interesting is that he has managed to identify there are some primary emotions that matter in individual customer journeys. So he's done things like researching a health insurance plan, using a new mobile phone for the first time, filling in a claim for an insurance thing, reaching out for technical support for your computer. We've all been there. Now, what's interesting is that there are certain things across the emotional spectrum that are predominant in terms of that outcome and the way the customer feels. Now, first time I'd ever seen this, reduced to a bit more scientific rather than just saying, yeah, of course that matters. And for me, again, it opens up the doors to saying, how could we do that?
Yeah, how should we be thinking about that? You know, which are our primary journeys that we run, and what are going to be the most predominant emotions? Because obviously, once you've got to that point of understanding, you can do something about it. So basically, as you go down the route there, you know, what are the most important emotions? Now, how do you start to build insight to that? Well, again, it's not entirely just going on keywords, because keywords have context and they can mean different things in different contexts. But basically building up an appreciation of the associated emotions in particular journeys in terms of keywords and phrases. It's interesting once you understand what the most typical emotions are in a given journey, and let's say they are the ones that are desired by the customer in that journey, how often are you hitting them? So again, have you got a metric around of the target experience per journey and your ability to deliver against that target experience? If you're really advanced, maybe you've also mapped that against personas. And it may well be that different personas have got different emotional expectations per journey. That's really fairly advanced. I don't think many people are there yet. But it's, you know, once you get into this space, it gets increasingly sophisticated. And then, of course, the thing that matters at the end of the day is to say, what is the connection between the way that the customer felt and the way they're prepared to rate that particular journey, that particular outcome? Because then we start to get close to understanding NPS score, propensity to buy more, and all those things that we talked about earlier on. So to me, in the way that we've spent, what, 20, 30, 40 years building a sort of inside-out set of metrics, this is the beginnings of building an outside-in, you know, set of metrics. And again, on my travels, I've seen bits of this turn up. Anybody listening, please pipe in and go, "Hoi, we're best practice here, this is what we've done." I suspect we're all beginning on this journey, but I can see this maturing and developing in a really fascinating way in customer service over the next period of time.
Oh, completely. Well, one of the things we've been strong on for many years, as you know, is our integration into CRM and the ability to pick up that data. So knowing what customers scored, knowing a bit about them, knowing their personalities, knowing what sports they like, whatever, you know, it doesn't matter. Whatever that data is, making it very easy, making the framework or making the contact center toolkit, if you like, very easy to pick that data up to make those routing decisions to help give a better experience, whether it's to route it to someone who, you know, like your agent likes football and you can match the customer up with the agent who likes football. In that respect, it doesn't really matter, but, you know, whatever you want to do to make the journey more memorable for the customer.
Yeah. So I think in addition to the if you want the facts that we've collected in CRM, this is a new domain, isn't it, to understand customers and behaviours.
Definitely.
Yeah, as well as that. So, you know, and just closed loop, really, making an obvious point here. If you look at the bottom pictures, you know, we're talking about video, we're talking about voice, we're talking about text forms of communication. Whatever channel mix you've got in operation, we need to feed that insight that you can get from analytics back into the coaching regime. And if we're going to make this sing, we should have a situation where I'm aware of, here's a customer trying to do this kind of thing with us. Typically the emotions are this. As Chris was saying, we might even have got to the point of recognizing an individual customer and their individual emotional signature. I think that's quite far out yet, but we can see that world. And I'm trained up to recognize and respond to that, you know, at the end of the day. Now, you might say that's a load of hooey, because actually that's what humans have done for thousands of years. But what we are getting to a point is making that visible and trackable so that we know how well that we're doing that. So that's all that area there. Now, having talked that up a bit, you know, it's a little bit sobering to realize that in terms of getting that level of connection between us and customers, we have still got a big journey. And again, another headline coming out of this year's piece of research from New Voice Media is that only 13% of us, when we're acting as consumers, feel that we've got that kind of connection with brands. Now, I'm not pretending, by the way, that that number should ever get to be 100%. I mean, if I just reference myself, it would be overwhelming that every organisation that I engage with, I want to have a deep emotional connection with. I don't think that's the case. But it would, you know, I think that 13%, on the other hand, is definitely underweighted and underrepresented. And there's a lot to chase for there. So I think it's probably time now, thinking about that and thinking about the journey we could take our customers onto, to tap into two things. One, what people have been saying, Rachel, in the chat room, which is, I can see there's been activity, but I can't quite see what's been said. And also just to encourage people to add more, if they can think of anything, in terms of what's your tips, either in terms of being a customer or in terms of stuff you're actually doing in your organization for nurturing. Now, I've used that word deliberately, taking people on a journey, nurturing an emotionally connected customer. All right. Now, we've recognized outcome, we've recognized being polite. Let's just move beyond those two things. What else gets people along a journey towards being deeply connected? And let's see if we can get a bit of crowdsourcing going on for the last period of time that we've got.
Yeah, so if I could just start, actually, well, I was reading this, some of the comments early on. Apologise immediately, don't ignore it, just, it's our fault. Great, we'll turn it around. Great one. I think Andrea made that one. I think it was Katina said being responsive is important. So again, that, don't delay things. Get the responses quickly, which we talked about earlier. I think, again, still one of the biggest things for me, especially with people in the service industry, people in my industry, people in my department, having the product knowledge, the really good product knowledge, they think that's got to be top of mind as well.
Yeah. Well, actually, all three of those are massively important. I mean, the last one, by the way, talking to somebody who doesn't know the answer is just incredibly frustrating.
Oh, completely.
Yeah. And so back to the emotive thing, if we are going to use humans as part of the bonding process, it's a totally failed opportunity if they don't know the answer, if I could have researched it. So I think the routing, first time, every time, funnily enough in this world, is getting more and more important as self-service as an option grows.
I think it was Brian who made that comment, but also he said they kind of regularly run training sessions, refreshes, product knowledge, and just keep that, on a daily basis. I suspect keeping that product knowledge up to date for their agents.
Okay. Rachel, can you step in?
Yes. Apologies if I read out any that we've already covered, but so Andrea said, apologise immediately, ask how we can turn things around.
Yep,
absolutely.
Said, on turning around a poor CX, actively listen to the customer's needs and take the burden off the customer, take ownership and follow up as promised.
I think one of your webinars that you've had in this series was active listening, wasn't it?
That's tomorrow, but we've actually done a lot about so tomorrow at 10:30 we've got that webinar, but we were discussing this morning about taking ownership and things of customers' problems. So,
but it's worth exploring that just for a second, because again, in terms of some of the competency sets, why that matters, if you think about it in customer experience terms, is the feeling that nobody believes me, that I have to struggle to make sure that you believe what I've said about that, and certain organisations and insurance, claims in insurance, apparently right now, the level of ID theft in insurance has gone through the roof badly. That can really condition insurers to become very defensive and not trust their customers at all. Now imagine you're a genuine customer and something extraordinary has happened and you're trying to make a claim, and you have to struggle for the person to accept that what you're saying is the truth. That's where the real rubber hits the tire. Do you mean that? You know what I mean? In terms of authenticity, getting that stuff done. And that's why active listening is so important, that the experience of the customer is not put in doubt. And yet we're not mugs at the same time. That's really quite a difficult thing to get right. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
So Laura said, use empathy. We need to understand how customers feel to be able to be the best to help. I think it's perfectly what you've been saying all the way through, Martin.
Yes. Well, again, quick point here. Percentages of your training that you do as induction, what percentage is devoted to empathy? I'd like to see some stats.
So we've got a question sent in by Jackie, who's actually asked, how do you measure emotion?
Yes. I would start by saying it's a mapping process.
Journey mapping,
whereby there are some core emotions. Let's start with the easy ones. Anger, fear, happiness. Let's just stay there. What are the kind of words that a customer would use typically, or phrases, that you would associate with each of those? And that's the way in which you begin to get a way of categorizing them and understanding them at the end of the day. Now, funnily enough, I've done a bit of work on that, and if you go Googling and you get interested, you will, particularly if you look at the images, you can find kind of mandala type imagery, which shows it.
Yeah, well, on that point, actually, there's some work from Colin Shaw that I looked at London, I think it's the London Business School, boiling down 20 emotions into 4 categories: advocacy, recommendation, attention, and destroying. So, putting it into that framework. So I would imagine that's a great place to start. He's got one. You've got ones really up to, there's about 26 base ones you can have with subsidiaries and all that kind of good stuff. So there's some, to answer the question, there's a lot of good research you can take to build your own basic models. Start simple to begin with, I would suggest, and tuning up people's appreciation of that. So in addition, for example, to ticking the box saying that was a talk about, I don't know, claims, you might have another place where you get people to reflect and said, what was the most prevalent emotion in that communication? Just to get people trained into recognizing emotion. And then obviously what we're in the business of flipping negative into positive and reinforcing positives. But it's a good thing to collectively get to a common level of capability on that. And in terms of the technology, obviously, I would say that speech analytics and call recording are 2 very important tools to do it, to help you.
I'll tell you a funny thing, if you can do machine learning just for a second. There's now an algorithm which can spot sarcasm. And the way they've done it is that they have correlated words against the use of certain emojis. Right? And they started with 50 billion tweets. They took it down to 6, right? And then they got the connections. And apparently, then doing human volunteers on, is it machine talk that they use, isn't it? It's a Google thing. Anyway, they got to the point where the machine, the algorithm, was more accurate than the humans at spotting sarcasm at the end of the day. So there is a science to this, and it holds true. Anyway. Next question, sorry.
Yeah, so Andrea actually answered this one as well, that she said after each interaction, the customer can pick from a different emoji, so like smiley face or sad face, and then ask for reasons, feedbacks and comments, which is a great way of interactions.
Funny enough, we did that. Yeah, our support team did that from the back of cases, support cases. It's the same thing. A survey goes out with a smiley face or a happy face, and we drive it from there.
Yeah, that's good. I'd like to see more versions, though. I think the 3 versions are good. I think we could probably finesse that these days into maybe 8 or 9. That's cool, though. But it does work, though. That's cool.
So we've had a tip in from Katina, who said, being responsive is important. Say what you'll do and do what you say.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the most disempowering things that I think a lot of frontline teams have is the sense that they can't directly affect things getting done on behalf of the customer. And it often leads, and I've noticed this when I've done work on social customer service, people don't get back to me, they don't promise what next best action is going to be. And there's a very simple technique that everybody can use. Even if you don't know what's going to happen and whether or not people in middle office will have got the thing resolved in time, you can always commit to a customer that you'll contact them at a certain point. Could be the end of the day, beginning of next day, by live or just as a follow-up, to let them know what has happened. And that reclaims the sense in which you can deliver an outcome and give a guaranteed experience at a certain point in time. And it's all part of the skill, if you want, of delivering a positive experience.
Can I, actually, Rachel, I'll just jump in. There's one here from Charlie I quite like. Ask customer via SMS to summarise their conversation in one word after the call, then categorise this word as a positive, neutral or negative. This may help to track the emotions that customer are feeling. I like
good.
That. It's good.
Very good.
On it, straight away. So it's collecting feedback really
love it. Very good. Yeah, that's great.
Actually, Charlie sent in this one as well. Measure emotion at each touch point of the customer journey to see where you need to make the biggest changes to your customer experience. We've obviously discussed the customer journey quite a lot. Laura said training to have a team with good knowledge and confident on processes.
Yes. Indispensable.
Kathleen said emotionally connected customers can lead to a relationship-based connection with the associate and build trust, even in a situation that's not so great. As you were saying, Martin, saying I'll follow it up and actually committing to that.
Well, let me just put an idea out. I know it's hugely controversial because the industry just does not do this apart from a few brands such as First Direct, and that is having a relationship between an advisor and an end customer. Because we are talking about making a connection here, and whilst you don't want a brand to be, you know, it only works because that person's going to answer my question, I do think we miss an opportunity by not being able to at least complete a case with the same person, you know, within the limitations of shifts, etc. And it is interesting that First Direct encouraged that amongst, I think they're one of very few brands that do it, and guess what their reputation is. So I think there's more that can be done there, and apparently there is not a productivity loss on that either.
No.
I've seen some of that data.
No, definitely not. I'm far from it. I think the issue is shifts there, especially in a service centre. But again, the technology is great for that now. That sort of stuff, case only routing, we call it, is our particular flavour on that.
Okay.
And it's very easy to do.
Right, okay.
Charlie said, encouraging advisors to try and understand the customer's points and then repeat them back to ensure that everything has been fully understood can be a good idea. Do you agree with that one, Martin?
Yeah, that's all good hygiene stuff. Yeah, absolutely right.
Kathleen said, don't escalate at first. Try and turn the problem into an opportunity. This is a perfect example of building the trust and ownership with a customer. Relate to the customer's needs and emotions.
Yeah, put the other way around. If you have got a situation where you're not, you know, because we say on average what the industry has 70% first-time resolution. In the context of customer effort, it's very interesting to dig into that 30%. You know, and say how many times take two times over, 3 times over, 4 times over, etc., etc., etc. But if you dig into that and really go in depth to understand the reasons why, there are numerous reasons. It can be policy, it can be authority levels, etc., etc. But with some work, particularly with the frontline teams, it's easy to reverse some of the silly things that happen and get more frequent, I can make this happen for you now. And it's not difficult to knock a few percentage points off very quickly and keep raising that bar. You know, we should now be in a marketplace where at least 90% of everything gets dealt with there and then. Yes, at the very least. So everyone is languishing, and somebody told me quite recently that actually, if you know really how to measure first-time resolution, it is not as good as 70% anyway. So that's an area of that we need to get more focus on, and we need to get better at.
Yeah. I think actually, Chris, you read out the one from Brian, didn't you? So we'll go on to a question, which is, how would you go about analysing your current customer experience? I know mystery shopping is used often, but I was wondering if you had any other suggestions.
Well, I think, there's a couple of things. In terms of gathering the feedback, then I'm a firm believer that you don't listen to one point of view. You know, you listen to a number. I think post-interaction is good. I think analytics is good. I think frontline feedback on the experiences is excellent.
Ask agents to raise their hand, and it could be anonymous, right? They don't have to do it face-to-face.
And then drink your own champagne in terms of mystery shopping. That's always good. And basically, the other thing to mention is with the amount of feedback that we expect customers to provide these days, you get what you pay for. So there is no substitute for getting in front of real live customers. Now, it's not easy to get their time and attention on that, but if you have got the opportunity and you really ask them to think about what they're saying, you can get a different reality and a deeper level of reality coming through. So that's one of the things about how you get at least the feedback from customers in terms of understanding that. The other thing, by the way, is sitting down with customers, talking about the journeys that you're doing with them, and again, finding out what matters to them and talking frequently about that and trying to get underneath the surface of that and make sure that you've got everything prioritized. And then you will find that probably changes based on persona, which is where some of the sophistication comes. So that's quite a journey to A, captured what matters, B, get it coded against different parts of the journey, and then finally potentially make that more complex by understanding how that might change by persona. But really, at the most simple level, the beginning to ask people that question is the start of understanding. And Charlie's comment is a good one, by the way. I think we often restrict our insight by asking mechanical questions such as NPS and satisfaction, and you get a rote answer from customers as a result. don't forget the opportunity just to say, how is it for you? What matters to you? I know nothing. Give me a word. And that's the power of that, because you can get a much more authentic response.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We've actually reached the top of the hour, so if you'd like to put in the chat room in 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about the webinar? Today's winning tip is from Abigail, who said, understand the emotion behind the query, request or complaint, then customize your resolution to the customer based on this.
Congratulations, Abigail. Very good.
Funny enough, I wrote that one down. I didn't read it out. I'm
delighted.
I'm pretty
well done.
Well done, Abigail.
So just to ask if you could complete the survey on leaving, it's just 4 questions long. And if you'd like a demonstration of the new voice media software, there's an opportunity to fill in the box in that survey. There is a replay and slides. It will be available later on this afternoon. And just to let you know that we are back tomorrow with how to develop active listening in the contact centre. That's at 10:30 tomorrow. And I just want to say thank you very much to our 2 speakers today, to Martin Hill-Wilson from Brain Food Consulting. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And to Chris Haggis from New Voice Media. Thank you very much as well for joining us.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Goodbye.